Good afternoon, everyone. Mary Sloan here with another episode of Inspirational Influencer News, People Making a Difference. And my guest this afternoon, Siddiqi Ray, is a renowned speaker and someone who is really making a difference in her world. And we're so delighted to have her with us. She's a speaker, she's a coach, she has developed her 30-year career as a professional photographer and master mentor to women into programs to support change maker women and business owners to master their intuition to enable their success and results in the world. It's great to tap into that intuition because we definitely have it, but we don't always trust it. Siddiqi is the founder and creator of the groundbreaking Soul Portrait Process and creator of Instinctive Success, a program to develop and train your intuition muscle. For over 30 years, Siddiqi has worked with world-leading organizations and leaders, including the Mayo Clinic, Target, the Associated Press, the Navy SEALs, the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Deepak Chopra, and the Kennedys to support their leadership and work in the world. Siddiqi was recently awarded the Icon Award by the International Women's Economic Forum for her work with women community leaders. So welcome, Siddiqi. And what is it that you really, really want our listeners to hear today as we talk?
Oh, that's a great question. So what I really want people to know and understand is that your intuition is a muscle. It's just like a bicep. Every single living being, including animals, has a sense of intuition. It's hardwired into us. And when you tap into it, when you start to listen to it, when you start to actually trust it and pay attention, your life totally changes into all sorts of success that you never even imagined that you could have. And of course, I'm going to tell you stories about this, but it's now more than ever, now that a lot of things are online, we're making these connections with people all over the globe that we've never met. Really using that resource of your intuition is critical, not only to avoiding disasters, but also to new levels of success.
And how exactly do you teach people to exercise this muscle? That I hadn't really thought about intuition as a muscle, but interesting thought.
Yeah. So, we all have disasters. That person that we ended up dating, I know you're married and I'm married now, but going through all sorts of dating apps and just using my curiosity and my intuition to just look at people's photos. Of course, I'm a photographer by training for 30 years. And so I know how to look deeply into people and just trusting my initial hit on something, like that initial thought or feeling that you have that has no intellectual backup, but like really trusting it. And so when I train people to use their intuitive muscle, especially in business, so that they can trust their instincts, what I start with is the disasters. So like, when did you not listen? Like, what is the biggest thing that has happened in your life? Your accountant ripping you off, or your husband running off with the money, and reverse engineer it into, you did have that initial thought, feeling, and you just totally ignored it and overrode it and kept going. And it led to that crisis, whatever it was. And so I always start the training with, when was a time that you knew what you knew and you ignored it and it ended up in disaster, and you looked back and said, oh God, I knew that person was going to do that. And so it's really starting with the most obvious. I want to avoid more disasters. I want to avoid more nightmare clients. I want to avoid losing money, whatever it is. And then looking at where you do trust it and use it, which is usually when people are in some kind of state of, they call it a state of flow, or, they're genius. So looking at both ends of the spectrum, the extremes and then working our way to the middle to just practical intuition that you access every day and you begin to trust it.
So do you teach people kind of a routine, or do you ask them to ask questions, or how do you kind of help them to, because I think that while, yes, I can see that I have that intuition, and sometimes I listen, and as someone said, just say thank you when you get those nudges, because the universe is helping you. But I'm not always paying attention, and I'd certainly like to develop that muscle more.
Yes, yes. So the first thing is to do exactly what you just said, Mary, to pay attention. And so I have people, whether it's, I have it in my phone, in my notes section, when I get these intuitive hits, when I ask a question, when the question is answered by something, I'm going to find it because it's hilarious, the things that I keep in here. But I get people to start writing it down in a journal, and, this is mine, this is my journal. And so when I ask a question, and then I'm standing in line at the coffee shop, and I see this woman with this jacket, and on the back of it, it says the best is yet to come. I'm like, that was an answer. Photo, write a note about it. And, then the next day I was like, is intuition woo? Is it weird? And then this guy was at the coffee shop. Magic feels so good, and I was like, should I really help people tap into their intuition? And then this billboard, find your greatness. So that's just one way to really start noticing that when you ask a question of your intuition, which is part of your subconscious reality, the reality that's always going on in the background, when you bring it to the forefront and you want to try to understand it, and you ask very specific questions, and then you're on the lookout for the answers, and you get the answers and you document it, it reinforces that muscle. And that's what I'm talking about. Intuition is a muscle. It's always there. And we don't often trust it and pay attention to it because we're like, oh, it's woo, it's out there, it's not scientifically proven. Well, actually, it is scientifically proven to exist as a part of our nervous system and our hardwiring and our brain gut connection. So there is real science behind it, but in order to really trust it and develop it, you have to start documenting it. I ask, the answer is always given. It shows up in random ways. Maybe there's some interpretation involved, but you start to really acknowledge it. And that's the first step, to really acknowledge when it does show up and when it is accurate.
That makes sense, because, until you start to notice something, it's not there. I mean, we've all had instances where you've walked around a house or something, and there's been a coffee cup that's been missing or something, and you've walked past it and you've walked past it and you've walked past it, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, when did that get there?
That's me on a daily basis with my keys, Mary. But it's that scientific experiment where they said, I remember back in the day in the 70s, I grew up with hippie parents from Berkeley, California, and we had a VW bug that was like, blue, Tiffany blue. And we would play that game Punch Bug, where you would say, yellow car. And every time you'd see a yellow car, I'd punch my sister in the arm. But it's that same concept of, you say, I want this answer. I want to see a yellow VW bug. And all of a sudden you start training your mind to be on the lookout for it. And you notice that it was right in front of you all along. And that's the same thing with intuition in your business, in your relationships, with your money, with your health. It shows up all the time. And we just don't want to listen to it because maybe sometimes it's not the answer that we really want. It's an inconvenient answer oftentimes.
You're so right about those things that you don't notice, and you don't notice, and then they're everywhere. We bought a new car, I don't know, about a year ago now, but I mean, it was a different kind of car than we were looking for, but it just was an amazing car, and something that really, once we kind of drove it, we loved it. And all of a sudden they were everywhere, like, oh, I've never seen this kind of car. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
So now I'm on the lookout. Oh, that's a solder. So Yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm, mhm.
So how does that help you when you so now you've got your intuition working with you,
Mhm.
and then how do you use that in your daily life or in creating the success that you want in your life? How does that move you forward?
Well, let's just talk about it online business. I'm assuming that a lot of your people are entrepreneurs or coaches or consultants, or maybe they're in corporate America, and you're on a business meeting or you're on a networking meeting and the Zoom screen is full of people and you feel attracted. Something catches your eye about someone on that screen. That's your intuition. And so the next part of that, using it in your business, is to get curious, get into some deeper kind of conversation or contact with the person, even if it's 15 minutes, and just get curious about what that pull was, what that magnetism was. There's some kind of information there. And it's as if you have a thread and you start pulling the thread and it unravels all the information. And so at first, what we get is we get this one little blip on the radar of information. And when we go deeper into it, we get more information. And so I use it in networking meetings. That's how you and I connected. I was like, ooh, Mary Sloan, she looks like she's up to something. I'd really like to talk to her. I had no idea it would turn into an opportunity to be interviewed on your awesome show, but that's how I use it. I use it to narrow the field in the sea of sameness of just looking at all these faces online. I use it to narrow the field of who am I really meant to connect with? Who can I really serve? Who has information for me, or who do I have information for? And just show up curious and open to where that initial hit of attraction, where it leads me. And it's very successful. I've had every opportunity I've had in my business. When you read that bio of mine, the Navy SEALs, the Kennedys, every single one of those situations started with that initial hit. And then my next thought was always, oh, I'm not ready for that. I'm not the person for that. Surely there's someone more qualified. So what happens is we get the initial it's
Opportunity
like,
or something.
yeah, the initial opportunity, it shows up as like this brief flash. And then what immediately happens to all of us is a questioning and the egoic mind takes over and says, no, it couldn't be that. No, I couldn't be that. No, I'm not qualified for that. And we take ourselves out. We take ourselves out. And so that's what I really focus on is the next step. The first step is awareness. And the second step is awareness of when you had it and the inner critic voice, that voice of doubt that shows up and says, no, they'll find me out as a fraud. I'm not qualified for that. And we suspend that doubt for just a moment. And that's what creates the opportunities, especially in business. But it also works in relationships. I have so many examples of this working, but really when you read my resume, every single one of those situations was preceded by an initial blip of information that I then followed, not having zero idea where it would lead me. No idea. Like all those names, I would have never thought, oh yeah, I'm going to work with 4 Kennedy family members, coaching them. Oh yeah, I'm going to photograph the Dalai Lama 15 times. I couldn't have set that as a goal. I would have never set it as like on my vision board. It wasn't even in my concept of what was possible in my reality until it was. And then I leaned into it.
That's interesting. I mean, so it's just kind of like get that blip and just kind of go, okay, let's see where this goes and get really curious about it and just kind of keep, like you say, unraveling that thread or pulling in the thread or whatever you want to describe it as. And then be prepared to take that on. And I guess at that point, there's got to be some trust of yourself, right?
Yeah, some trust of yourself, some trust of the universe or whatever, however you see the powers that are around you, whatever you're referring to outside of yourself as some constructive energy in the universe that's supportive. and really leaning into that, because Mary, I'll tell you, most of the time, those initial intuitive hits are very inconvenient. They are not on the trajectory of how we set our course in life. They're not on, they might not be on the vision board, and it might be like, you want me to do what? And it feels like you're crazy at first. At first, it really feels like, well, if I really followed that and did that, people would think I was crazy. And why would I do that? And so there's an inconvenience to the intuition muscle. Just like when you're working out, it's easier to work out your biceps, but really, if you want sculpted arms as a woman, you have to work out your triceps as well. It's that muscle that you're like, I know that it's there, but it's a little painful to follow it. And that's what I have to convince people, that it's worth following, because you have no idea where it's going to lead you. It's very mysterious, but when you start to document it, when you start to pay attention to it, when you actually do start to follow it down this mysterious path, the things that unravel are so incredible that for a fact that you would have never gotten there any other way. And that's what makes it so successful as a tool in our lives and in our businesses and in our relationships, is that it leads you to unprecedented successes that you could have never, ever figured out any other way. And that's what excites me about it. It excites me so much to see people start to develop that trust of their instinct and the success that they have that they would have never had otherwise.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I can't say I have much muscle, so I guess I'll have to start documenting it. Documenting, here we come. And the idea of taking pictures is really interesting, because of course we all have our ubiquitous cell phone with us wherever we are. So just to be prepared to take pictures in a moment, like, oh, that's an interesting thought. Oh, look, blip. That's great, because it sort of reinforces, oh, I was on the right path. Interesting. And so you don't start out with any great plan for what you want to do. You really start out with more looking for who is that, or are you just kind of open?
That's a great question. I spend a lot of time in mindfulness-based practices. I actually have a research study that I pioneered for Mayo Clinic on mindfulness-based practices, such as meditation and yoga, and the profound impact it can have on individuals and on a community, especially of medical practitioners. So it all starts with mindfulness, and in that state of just calming down your mind and your nervous system, especially in these days where there's so much economic uncertainty. There's, post-COVID, there's a lot of, where are we going? What are we doing? There's a lot of exhaustion. And it starts with a mindfulness and a calming down, and then really getting to an essential question that you want an answer to. Like really coming up with a very definitive question of, should I be on this dating app, or should I go to this networking event or this networking event? And learning to follow that very circuitous route of little pieces of information, like little breadcrumbs that your subconscious mind is leading you to these outcomes. I don't know if that answered your question, but in terms of the training of it, the number one thing that people come up against is, can I trust it? Can I trust it? How do I know that is my intuition versus fear? How do I know which voice to follow? And so understanding that you are actually following it all the time. And when I've worked with really successful business owners, like I had this one client, he was worth $100 million. He is a creator of a piece of technology, and he has massive success in his business, like really massive success, but his love life is a total mess. And he hired me right after his wife died. And he said, I have all this money. I have the rest of my life ahead of me, and I'm afraid to get out there and date because I'm afraid people will misinterpret me, or they'll just want me for my money. And we really started to tap into, well, how is it that you've had so much success in your business? And when I really sat down with him, he's like, well, I get this schematic in my brain and I just pull out a pencil and my, paper and I start drawing it. And what I said is, so you're getting downloads. You're getting downloads of information. The schematic for the piece of equipment appears and you're putting it down, and that has made you $100 million. So you are successful at following this. Now we just have to translate that into an area where you've had a lot of, challenges. And so within a very short amount of time, he showed up someplace. He showed up to Ralph Lauren to buy himself some new shirts. And this woman was there, and he felt immediately like she caught his attention. And he was like, oh no, it couldn't be that easy. I couldn't just walk in a door and she'd be there. And he came back to me and I'm like, but yeah, that is exactly it. And so he went back several times to buy several more shirts. And he eventually asked her on a date, and 2 years later, they're married. And he's like, oh my God, this is the love of my life. But had he not had that understanding of, I'm successful with this over here, and it's made me $100 million, how can I translate it over here, to really trusting it? When he got that, he was like, oh my God, that was so easy. And I'm like, yep, it actually is easier this way. It's so much easier.
Yeah, I can see that, because there's a lot of angst and oh, did I make the right decision? Should I have done this? Where should I go? Yes, and our minds are really chatterboxes. I mean, if left unchanneled, which is why I can easily see how a practice of mindfulness and or meditation, or whatever you want to call it, where you can just calm that monkey mind or whatever they call it, because it really can run rampant if you just allow it to keep going.
Yeah, I've been trained. So my parents were hippies from Berkeley, California. And I grew up in New York, and while everybody else was going off to Bible camp, we were going to this place called the Edgar Cayce Institute. Edgar Cayce is the most well-known psychic in the Western world. He did over 80,000 readings in his life. They're documented. And we would go to the institute where Edgar Cayce was teaching. And so in fourth grade, when I'm like 10, I'm learning to communicate with dolphins. I'm learning to see flower fairies. I'm learning to meditate in pyramids. So I come by this, I come by this granola woo, really, as a result of my family. But I didn't understand how to bring that otherworldly information into my life and have it be functional. I call it functional woo. How to integrate it in a way that I didn't feel like it was so out there. And when I really looked at the success that I had, I started to see that it was all because I follow these instincts. And when we don't follow them, it leads to disaster, like financial ruin, the wrong relationship that you're stuck in. And you're like, you wake up one day and you're like, how did I even get here? So I just want to share one really brief example, if that would be helpful, about how being mindful helps you discern the next right steps. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. That would be great.
Okay.
And maybe just before you go down that route, just to be sure that we're all on the same page, I think I understand mindfulness, but not everybody in our audience might. So maybe you can just describe that a little bit.
Okay, great. There's a concept about meditation, Mary, that I'm going to sit down and I'm going to tame my monkey mind and I'm going to have peace. And I'm going to, the clouds are going to part and the sun rays are going to come down. And I'm going to all of a sudden feel this deep sense of peace, this deep sense of knowingness. And that is a huge myth about meditation, about mindfulness-based practices. Mindfulness-based practices are about noticing what is. So if you sit down and you're in huge amounts of anxiety, like I am often because I have too much green tea and too many lattes. And so I get super tightly wound, and I sit down and I feel this like there's an elephant sitting on my chest, or I feel a constriction in my throat. And mindfulness is just noticing that, not trying to fix it, not trying to figure it out, not trying to change it, just noticing it. And it's in the presence of noticing what is, either in your mind or in your body or in your environment. Oh, I'm slightly cold. Oh, I have tingling in my toes from the way I'm sitting. That slight discomfort, and noticing it without fixing it or changing it is the practice of mindfulness. And it's the same thing of, I'm asking my guidance for a question. I'm showing up at a coffee shop and this woman has this jacket on that says the best is yet to come. That is mindfulness. I'm mindfully aware that I asked a question and the answer was given. So that's how I see mindfulness. When I did this research study at Mayo Clinic, one of the things that we wanted to study was diet and like how people ate. And after going through this whole institutional review board at Mayo Clinic, they're like, you have 60 people in this research study. You can't possibly give them all a diet that's going to work. And so finally, I'm like, fine, we'll just have them document what they're eating and turn it in. And we won't tell them what to do. We'll just have them turn it in. We'll have a registered nutritionist look at it. We'll have her check a box that she saw it and we'll hand it back to them. And everybody was like, well, how's that going to change anything? I'm like, people just wait, just wait. And so after 40 days, this one nurse, a neonatal nurse who lived on chocolate chip cookies and Diet Coke.
Oh my gosh.
Like 12 cans of Diet Coke, 3 chocolate chip cookies, and some cough drops. And she would turn that in every week. It was like day after day, the same thing. And after 3 weeks of us seeing it, she intuitively knew the right thing to do. And she started switching her way of eating. That's mindfulness. That's noticing. You're not telling anybody what to do, but you're holding that space of, I know you know the right thing to eat. And it's not 12 cans of Diet Coke and 3 chocolate chip cookies a day. And when we observe, it's that whole, the string theory, when you observe the atoms start to change based on your observation of them. That's what mindfulness is. Things start to change when you just notice.
That's
Was
amazing.
that helpful?
Yeah, I think so. Because yes, for me, it was very helpful because, of course, I'm kind of somebody who one might call a control freak in many instances. You know, I like to know things are in control. And this trusting that the universe is always there and in control is certainly something that I can take away and go, okay, you don't have to be as tensed up about all this. You just have to start paying attention to what really is going on. And finally, your mind will figure out, oh, all right, so we're going to work on it this way. All right, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's very helpful too in averting the next crisis, whether it's in your love life, with your health. I have lots of devastating stories of when I didn't follow it. And, you know, there was one time when a colleague invited me onto a trip to check out this yoga retreat place in Mexico. And my initial hit was like, no, don't do it. Don't go. And my mind was like, oh my God, are you kidding? A first class plane ticket to Mexico and I get to go on this retreat. And so my logical mind was like, of course I want to go. But something in me was like, no. Well, it ended up that I had a major accident on that retreat and I slipped and fell at night in the jungle in Mexico.
Oh my
and
gosh.
ended up breaking the whole left side of my body and spending 2 years in and out of surgery, having like my knee, my hip, my shoulder reconstructed. And I look back and I'm like, gosh darn it, I should have listened, you know, because that initial hit, it was like, it was just there. It was a knowingness, but I didn't want to trust it. I didn't want to follow it. And for 2 years, I kicked myself. Gosh darn it, I should know this by now. I should know to listen to that. But the problem is, it's really hard to listen, Mary, when we don't have evidence that what we're listening to is for us. That information is in our favor. It's not leading us astray. It's trying to protect us. It's trying to help us. It's trying to help us to get further faster with where we want to go. But we're constantly in resistance to it. We're constantly taking in data and we're misinterpreting it. And so one of the situations that I want to share that's really profound is right now I'm in Auckland, New Zealand. I'm married to the love of my life. And I got here because 2 years after all these surgeries, I was really emotionally devastated. I was just really in a dark place. My friend invited me to this event, and everything in me was like, hell no, I don't want to go. I mean, it was at a point where I had had so many surgeries. I was like resigned. I wasn't even taking showers. It had been 2 years. I was like, I didn't even leave the house. It was really, really, really a dark time in my life. And my friend invited me to the event, and my egoic voice said, hell no, I don't want to go. I don't want to bother. And that there was just this blip on the radar of, you're going to go to that event. And I was like, oh, that's curious. Really? I am. So long story short, I go to the event. I take a shower, I do my hair and makeup. It was like the first time in 2 years. And I walk in the door, and from across the room, I see this man, and I just knew. I'm like, that's my husband.
Wow.
He's like, really? And, here I am 2 years later, actually 4 years later, we're married. I'm living in New Zealand with him. I would have never guessed. And then the next thing that happened was we started dating, and we were going back and forth between Los Angeles, where I was based, and New Zealand. And we were building a life in Los Angeles. And I had just come back from spending 3 months in New Zealand in March of 2020. And I got very, very sick. I was very fatigued. I had a fever. I was, having a difficult time breathing. I go to the emergency room in LA. I'm like, are you going to test me for that thing? They're like, we don't have any COVID tests. This is March 2020, no tests in all of LA. And they're like, go home and isolate. And I went home, and I was so tired. I'm like, I'm just going to sit and meditate. I'm just going to sit and do nothing because I'm so exhausted. I remember crawling to the bathroom. That's how tired I was. I was just dreadfully fatigued. And so I'm sitting there in meditation. And when you're that tired, it's easy to just kind of like lull into this place of sleep. And I would go to get up, and I would feel so peaceful and so calm. And I would get up, and I'd get hit by this wave of terror, like pure, unadulterated, animalistic shaking, crying, in this voice in my head that said, run for the hills. And I was like, what's happening? Where is that coming from? And it was crazy making Mary, because in my life, Justin and I had planned, we have an immigration lawyer. He's coming to LA. He was coming in 2 weeks. And this voice in my head was completely irrational given the situation. And so I would talk to Justin every night. He was still in New Zealand, and I'd be like, oh my God, I've got to get out. I've got to get out. I have this feeling. And he'd be like, calm down, calm down. Like, there's nothing wrong. You're fine. I'm coming. And so for 4 days in a row, I would have this sense of, I'd go into this place of peace in meditation. I'd quiet down my mind. I'd have no agenda. I'd get up, and every day the same exact terror would hit me. And finally, I'm like, I'm getting out. I don't know what's happening, but I'm getting out and following it. And after 4 days, Justin was like, okay, calm down, babe. I'm sending you a plane ticket. And he bought me a very expensive ticket for the next morning, because he could tell how completely freaked out I was by this sense I was having. And I got on the plane. There was nobody on it. It was March 23rd, 2020. LAX International Airport, if you've ever been there, is usually a swarm of people. There was 50 people in the whole airport. There was about 10 people on the plane. Because everybody was not traveling. Everybody was like, what's going on? I'm staying in place.
This thing? Yeah.
Right. What is it? I get on the plane, and an hour outside of Auckland, the pilot gets on, and he's like, well, folks, we just heard from New Zealand Border Patrol. Because of this ongoing thing, they're closing their borders tonight, and this is the last flight in.
Oh my gosh.
And I arrived at 9 a.m. on the days that New Zealand as a country decided to shut their borders permanently for 2 years.
Oh yeah.
And if I had not followed that intuition and gotten on that plane on that day, my husband and I would have been, we were dating at the time, we would have been worlds away. And I don't even know if the relationship would have survived COVID, because so many relationships didn't. So this is what I'm talking about. When you build a trust for this muscle, for this sense, for this knowingness, when you trust it enough to follow it before you have evidence of where it's leading you, you just know what you know and you do it, you end up on the other side of the world in paradise, with your soulmate, while the rest of the world is going through hell. And that's what I want to say. Like, you can avert crisis and avoid accidents, avoid all sorts of untold misery and suffering. And on the other side of it, it can lead you to what I'm saying is unprecedented success, but you have to learn to follow it before you have the information that makes sense to you or to anybody else. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it, Mary. Everybody would be using this.
Yeah. First of all, wow. And secondly, I mean, I'm so delighted that you managed to get out, because that really turned into a terrible, terrible, terrible time. And nobody saw that coming. But it's also really interesting how strong that feeling can get once you've exercised that muscle, because you've been at this for a long time. I mean, you almost grew up in it. And so as a result, it was prepared to be pretty rough with you to make it clear. And you were prepared to listen and let it be that rough, because you thought, it's trying to tell me something. I guess I better listen, get the hell out of here.
And here's the part where we hit resistance. I hit resistance with the women and the men that I coach. Some of these people are really big, like they are CEOs, they are big people in business. And when that initial instinct comes, they're like, but this could literally change the trajectory of everything. How am I going to explain it to the people that, I work with? How am I going to back it up? What am I going to do? And it's like, yeah, it is an inconvenient calling to follow this at times. However, Mary, I just had a client. I don't want to brag, but I literally just got a $40,000 bonus from a client, because one of the things that came up in our coaching was there was this very traumatic thing that happened to her in college. And it just kept coming to me intuitively. You've got to follow up on this. You've got to call it out. And she was like, oh, hell no. She was the head of a very, very big department at a very, very big recognizable company. And she was like, if I come out about this over here, it will jeopardize everything that I have created and done in my career. And I was like, yes, but this thing somehow is the key to a greater level of success. And she's like, we went back and forth for 2 years. And finally, what came to me is, okay, just go talk to this lawyer. Fast forward 3 years, Mary, the biggest lawsuit in the history of the United States. It turned into a class action lawsuit. This one client of mine went to this one lawyer, and the lawyer started digging, and he was like, oh my God, this has happened to hundreds of people at this college. Hundreds of women have been abused by this gynecologist, and the college did nothing.
God.
3 years later, we have 800 people that got on board this class action lawsuit. $900 million was paid out, the biggest payout in the history of the United States to women in any kind of sexual misconduct suit ever. And it was my client. And I was like, I'm telling you, this is the key. In the midst of it, like all things conspired, COVID happened as this lawsuit was happening, like the whole company changed its trajectory. She got let go. So she no longer had to worry about, oh my God, what are people going to think of me in my position? It was irrelevant now. And, she called me less than 6 months ago, and she said, I'm looking at a check, and I never have to work again in my life.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So this, like, if people are wondering, will this pay off? I'm telling you, it paid $40,000 that I didn't expect. And for her, multiple seven figures as a result of learning to trust it amidst, and it comes up in the places that you're like, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. It's very inconvenient.
Oh, wow.
However, if you want like ginormous success, I'm telling you, this is the key. This is the key. And I could give you, I could literally, we could be on here for hours and I could tell you situation after situation of people following it and having this unprecedented success. And that, you know, if it's the last thing I do on this planet, I really want people to build this muscle of trusting their instincts, trusting their intuition, because it is the thing that all of us have. We all have biceps, unless you've had it removed. We all have this muscle that we can work, and it will make things easier, especially as the world gets more full of fear. My mission is to help people follow that still subtle voice that's under the fear, that's under the chaos, because that's the truth that will personally lead you to safety and to success.
Wow. Well, I usually end my shows promptly on time, and we haven't, but it was definitely worth going over because it was a fantastic, just a story that, you know, is so compelling about what happens even when you're terrified, even when you think that, no, this can't be right. This makes no sense whatsoever. But, you know, if you can trust that inner guidance, wow. Okay, time to start working on a muscle for sure.
Mary, I'm doing a 5-day, I'm calling it Trust It. I'm doing a 5-day challenge in October. It's starting on October 17th in the United States. And over the course of 5 days, I'm going to give you all these basic tools for you to start trusting it. So I hope you come to that, and anybody
I will definitely be coming to that.
I'll make sure
and
that
we'll put out, you know
about it.
Because
I just want people to have these very basic tools to begin to develop that trust. And
wow.
It's really quite simple. It's like going to the gym. You got to just throw on your trainers in the morning and your tracksuit and go do it without thinking about it. That's really what I want for all of us to have, because it actually, as inconvenient as it does seem, it actually makes it easier. Life is so much easier. Business is so much easier. Relationships are so much easier when you start to trust that you do know the truth. So yeah, come to that Trust It event, and we'll get you all set up with the tools that you need to start practicing this in your everyday life.
And that's October the
17th through the 23rd.
17th.
Just an hour a day. I'm convinced that in 6 hours total, you will come out the other side really knowing and understanding that you do have this muscle, and you will have the tools that you need to start developing the mindfulness-based practices we use a lot of scientifically backed tools to help convince you that this has always been there, and that this is the thing that you now need to turn and walk towards rather than ignoring.
Awesome. This has been amazing. I will definitely mark it into my diary and find the Trust It, and we'll get a link and we'll put it around this, which of course is in Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, and we'll make sure that the world gets out there. And thank you so much for your time. It was amazing. Trust it. All right.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you everybody out there. I hope that this was the answer to your prayers. If you're listening to this, I hope that you asked and that you clearly see that the answer was given to you today about what to do next.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.